While Foundation and the Robot series are essentially load-bearing columns of modern science fiction, in one of his less referenced works, Isaac Asimov asks us to consider eternity. Not forever, but a grand organization built to manage history, to manipulate the past in pursuit of the best outcomes for humanity.
Timekeepers. The sacred timeline.
Something like that. Eternity has averted wars, plagues, steered mankind away from dead-end paths and toward the greatest good. If you think this sounds creepy and constructed almost entirely of paternalism and hubris, that is because you are not a fool. Andrew Harlan, originally from the 95th century, has been working for eternity for several years. He's a technician, one of those who directly implements all the little tweaks that change history. Above all, a technician must be dispassionate. The reality change he initiates may affect the lives of as many as 50 billion people. 1 million or more of these may be so drastically affected as to be considered new individuals. Under these conditions, an emotional makeup is a distinct handicap. Harlan is an exceptional technician, and he takes pride in his ability to engineer the desired outcome with the minimum necessary change. Now the MNC recommended, said Harlan. He spoke coolly, evenly, pronouncing the standard intertemporal language in precise syllables. By your section involves induction of an accident in space and the immediate death by fairly horrible means of a dozen or more men. Unavoidable, said Voy, shrugging. On the other hand, said Harlan, I suggest that the MNC can be reduced to the mere displacement of a container from one shelf to another, here. And this little change is enough, leveraging events in a ripple of ever-increasing impact toward the desired change. A young man with ambitions to become a scientist was unable to find the misplaced container, causing him to miss a lecture that determined the course of his studies, leading to a delay in the development of a certain bit of technology, finally averting a war in the 224th century. And that's what eternity does. Of course, the past is never perfect, so they keep tweaking it in a line of endless revisions and interventions. Their records include countless inventions, events, works of literature that have ceased to exist through their efforts, sometimes intentionally and sometimes as a side effect. Until the 70,000th century or so, where some kind of temporal block won't let them see or interact with those distant, hidden centuries. They don't know why. Maybe time itself is broken. For whatever reason, eternity itself is accessible up then, but time, the world outside their little pocket universe, is hidden from them. Harlan draws the attention of the highest levels of eternity. Senior computer Twistle brings him in for a meeting. Computer in this context is a title for a top-level administrator, not to be confused with a computaplex, a complex data processing machine. The book was written in 1955, and our familiar terminology hadn't quite settled in yet. His supervisor, Computer Finch, has delivered a rather unfavorable performance review. As a matter of fact, Finch's report was not favorable. He recommended that you be removed from all duties connected with reality changes. He suggested it wasn't safe to keep you anywhere but in maintenance. Part of this is that Finch is a bit of a dick, but he also has concerns that Harlan's interest in primitive history, which is to say the time before the invention of the means that make eternity possible, the unchanged distant past, shows a tendency to become attached to specific periods to the detriment of his work. But Twistle is looking for exactly that. In fact, I think your hobby is interesting and valuable. As I said, it's why I want you. I want you to teach a cub I shall bring to you all you know and all that you can learn about primitive history. In between, you will also be my personal technician. You'll start in a few days. Is that agreeable? He becomes kind of the de facto first among equals technician and mentors Cooper, a young man, but at 25 a bit old to have been brought into eternity as a cub. An apprentice, essentially. Are you interested in primitive history? Computer Twistle asked me to learn. I don't know much about it. What else are you learning? Mathematics, temporal engineering. I'm just getting the fundamentals so far. Back in the 78th, I was a speedy vac repairman. It's an odd set of circumstances all around, but it seems that Harlan is on the fast track to great things in eternity. But the fast track gives the most spectacular derailments. The form of Harlan's life-changing distraction is familiar in any time. Harlan had seen many women in his passages through time, but in time they were only objects to him, like walls and balls, barrows and harrows, kittens and mittens. They were facts to be observed. In eternity, a girl was a different matter, and one like this. In this case, she goes by the name of Noys Lambent, native to the 482nd century. Eternity's objectives aren't just brute force prevention of atrocities or averting dark ages. They're trying to normalize human history, make it efficient, in effect take out the peaks and valleys. But certain things keep coming back, pushed further up when, but always re-emerging. Space travel being one notable example. As one of Eternity's sociologists explains, "I wouldn't regret," he said, "having space travel bred out of reality altogether. What good is it? It never lasts more than a millennium or two. People get tired, they come back home, and the colonies die out. Then after another 4 or 5 millennia, or 40 or 50, they try it again, and it fails again. It is a waste of human ingenuity and effort." There are plenty who would agree with that assessment. But Harlan has a mission. The girl, Noys, is from an aristocratic family, and he is to accompany her back to her time and observe them to establish some baseline data for a change. Every few centuries, various superstitions arise about eternity, and they like to quash those before they lead people of any given time to consider that they've been constantly manipulated and altered. Several things stand out to him, from significant socio-political factors to peculiar little details. For example, at a reception there's a new drink, one that hadn't existed in that time before a very recent change made centuries before. Timey-wimey, janky sentence, it makes perfect sense if you break it down. Now, why had a reality change, which had virtually no physical effect on the century, brought a new drink into existence? Well, he wasn't a computer, so there was no use asking himself that question. Besides, even the most detailed possible computations could never eliminate all uncertainty, all random effects. If that weren't so, there would be no need for observers. Techno-socialists take note. During this mission, he and Noys engage in activities of the carnal variety that are prohibited for observers from eternity for all sorts of time-meddling reasons. And the seeds of treachery grow. See, Harlan is rapidly becoming infatuated with and protective of Noys. And he knows that when eternity tinkers, when they institute reality changes, they change the people too. And he wants her exactly as she is. She had not been his Noys of the previous reality of a physio year earlier. She would not be his Noys in the next reality. The new Noys might conceivably be better in some ways, but he knew one thing very definitely. He wanted this Noys here, the one he saw at this moment, the one of this reality. If she had faults, he wanted those faults too. What could he do? Several things occurred to him, all illegal. And she's an odd duck in a few ways, mathematically speaking. When Harlan has her life plotted on the sly, one of those illegal things, the results are more drastic than expected. The life plotter's matter-of-fact voice sounded thin. The dame doesn't exist in the new reality. No personality shift, she's just out. That's all gone. I ran the alternatives down to probability 0.0001. She doesn't make it anywhere. In fact, and he reached up to rub his cheek with long, spare fingers, with the combination of factors you handed me, I don't quite see how she fit in the old reality. And so he does the only thing that he can think of to protect her from the change, to keep her. He goes back to the 482nd century and takes her far, far up when into the 100,000s, the hidden centuries where eternity has no access beyond its own confines. Of that distant future they know nothing. They can neither observe nor interact, and the facilities of eternity sit empty in their little pocket dimension, shielded from changes to the timeline. But stashing her in the far future isn't a solution, only a way to buy time for a real plan. He visits a few times in the following days, bringing her supplies and giving updates on his efforts to find a more agreeable place for them to go, until one day he's unable to go that far up when. The machine stops as though blocked by a temporal wall. He didn't think that was possible, and when all his efforts come to naught, he confronts computer Finch, who has become his nemesis of sorts. There is some sort of a block across the kettle shafts at the 100,000th. I want it removed. But Finch doesn't know anything about that. Now, there are multiple reasons why I generally don't care for time travel stories, and The End of Eternity has several of them. But the big one is the closed loop. So while Harlan is scheming and confronting his superiors to get Noys back, he figures out that he's been set up for something going back a good chunk of his life. The mathematics behind time travel appear in the 24th century, but they couldn't possibly have been devised until the 27th. Something is broken, but Harlan figures out that Cooper, who he was assigned to teach the history and culture of precisely that era, and whose studies also involved precisely those mathematics, is being sent back to assist Vicar Mallinson, the inventor of everything that eternity is built on. The man most of eternity knows as Vicar Mallinson left the record of his life behind him after he died. It was not quite a diary, not quite a biography. It was more of a guide, bequeathed to the Eternals he knew would someday exist. The short of it being that Cooper took over the life of Mallinson and laid the groundwork for eternity in the 24th century. Harlan was brought on because, well, prophecy with math is still prophecy. Having entered eternity, Cooper was trained in mathematics by a computer named Laban Twistle and in primitive sociology by a technician named Andrew Harlan. After a thorough grounding in both disciplines, and in such matters as temporal engineering as well, he was sent back to the 24th to teach certain necessary techniques to a primitive scientist named Vicar Mallinson. But through a combination of mishaps and Harlan's surliness, Coop ends up in the wrong time, and so begins a desperate move to recover him, keep the circle from breaking, and ensure eternity's survival. But there's more. Twistle has a theory about that temporal block in the future. A theory that terrifies him. A man who can travel into the indefinite future may meet men as far advanced over himself as he himself is over an ape. Why not? Maybe, but men are men. Even in the 70,000th, yes, I know, and have our reality changes had something to do with it? We bred out the unusual. Perhaps, in all honesty, in all sincerity, we've prevented human evolution because we don't want to meet the Supermen. Still no spark was struck. Harlan said, then it's done, what does it matter? But what if the Superman exists just the same, further upwind than we can reach? We control only to the 70,000th. Beyond that are the hidden centuries. Why are they hidden? Because evolved man does not want to deal with us and bars us from his time? Why do we allow them to remain hidden? Because we don't want to deal with them, and having failed to enter in our first attempt, we refuse even to make additional attempts? I don't say it's our conscious reason, but conscious or unconscious, it's a reason. Harlan is unmoved. It seems a rather academic problem if they're all cut off from each other. But Twistle is concerned that they may interpret a presence in eternity so far upwind toward their time as the start of an incursion. And they may retaliate. And now Harlan was on his feet in full horror. They have Noys! They race up in time only to find that the barrier is gone. Harlan and Noys are joyfully reunited. Computer Twistle is relieved that no surly supermen from the future are in evidence, and everyone calms down from the edge of panic. Surmising that Cooper would use the print media of the day to send a message, Harlan goes through the archives and finds, through a carefully crafted advertisement, that Cooper is in 1932, Denver. Harlan is sent back to recover him and get him to the correct time, and of course he refuses to leave Noys again, so she comes along. But all the while, something is nagging at him. The barrier was there before. It did not stop disturbing him. It was a matter that grew in mind as the days of preparation sped by. It interposed itself between him and Twistle, then between him and Noys. As they find the cave that Cooper had used as his initial camp, leaving some equipment for them to find, Harlan is still thinking about that barrier. It's the key to the whole affair somehow. There was only one answer to that question. The existence of that barrier sent me raving back downwind to get a neuronic whip to assault Finge. It fired me to the thought of risking eternity to get you back and smashing eternity when I thought I had failed. Do you see? Noys stared at him with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Do you mean the people in the upwind wanted you to do all that? They planned it. Harlan is caught in this wave of exhilaration at being on the edge of an answer and irritation at having been so thoroughly manipulated into serving the ends of another. His entire life just a scripted bit in someone else's story. You mean the men of the hidden centuries arranged that too? They put it all in your mind and maneuvered you properly? Yes. Yes. Nor are they done. There is still work for them to do. The circle may be closing, but it is not yet closed. How can they do anything now? They're not here with us. No. He said the word in so hollow a voice that Noys paled. Invisible super things, she whispered. Not super things, not invisible. I told you man would not evolve while he controlled his own environment. The people of the hidden centuries are Homo sapiens, ordinary people. Then they're certainly not here. Harlan said sadly, You're here, Noys. Ah, he's a bright lad. He gets there eventually. And so he's prepared to kill her, this interloper from the hidden centuries that twisted and used him for her own ends. He will do his duty and save eternity, save for some lingering ember of doubt. In his doubt, he wants explanations. He demands answers. So she drops the act. We discovered eternity indirectly. First, we developed the calculus of realities and tested our own reality through it. We were amazed to find we lived in a reality of rather low probability. It was a serious question. Why such an improbable reality? They could see the hand of eternity at work, busily tweaking and mending, breaking and bollocksing, meddlesome little men who think they know best. They set up the temporal block, isolating eternity downwind of the 70,000s. Not perfect, but enough mitigation to buy them time. And they began to look forward from their time. Long-range damage assessment. They knew, just as eternity had observed, that certain ideas and technologies recur over and over again, no matter how many times they're excised. Time seems to flow toward a natural course. It can be delayed and diverted, but eventually always returns to form. And then they found the real cost of eternity's meddling. We learned the destiny of man and the reality that actually existed in order that we might compare it eventually with basic state. Somewhere past the 125,000th, mankind solved the secret of the interstellar drive. They learned how to jump through hyperspace. Finally, mankind could reach the stars. And once they could reach the stars, they did so and left the Earth. Some of us have guessed that. Then some of you have guessed wrong. Man tried to leave Earth. Unfortunately, however, we are not alone in the galaxy. There are other stars with other planets, you know. There are even other intelligences. None in this galaxy, at least, are as ancient as mankind, but in the 125,000 centuries man remained on Earth, younger minds caught up and passed us, developed the interstellar drive, and colonized the galaxy. When we moved out into space, the signs were up. Occupied, no trespassing, clear out. Mankind drew back its exploratory feelers and remained at home. But now he knew Earth for what it was. A prison surrounded by an infinity of freedom. And mankind died out. It took thousands of centuries, there were ups and downs, but on the whole there was a loss of purpose, a sense of futility, a feeling of hopelessness that could not be overcome. Eventually there was one last decline of the birth rate and finally extinction. Your eternity did that. There's a lot going on here. We're looking at a proto-space age view, a highly optimistic vision of human space exploration from a time when manned spaceflight was just recognized as truly possible, but the difficulties not fully grasped. Strap a big rocket on your ass and head out amongst the planets, wagon train of fire to the moon and Mars. The start of the Star Trek New Frontier idea. We're also looking at a story that is on every level an attack on the idea of directed history of centrally planned society. Notable that it's written by a man whose family fled the Soviet Union when he was a child. And it embodies an ethos that is at the heart of many fractures today, a big part of why we so often talk past each other. As Noys states it, in ironing out the disasters of reality, eternity rules out the triumphs as well. It is in meeting the great test that mankind can most successfully rise to great heights. Out of danger and restless insecurity comes the force that pushes mankind to newer and loftier conquests. Can you understand that in averting the pitfalls and miseries that beset man, eternity prevents men from finding their own bitter and better solutions, the real solutions that come from conquering difficulty, not avoiding it? And all of the grand scheming and careful management comes down to the choice of one man. Harlan can save the system, or he can end it. Will mankind embrace managed mediocrity ending in extinction, or turn into the storm of history to ride the towering waves until he can fly on his own? At least, that's how she frames the choice. Mankind spreading across new worlds, onward to galactic empire, or sad, dwindling end. All the universe or nothing. And what would have been gained, asked Harlan doggedly. Would we be happier? Whom do you mean by we? Man would not be a world, but a million worlds, a billion worlds. We would have the infinite in our grasp. Each world would have its own stretch of the centuries, each its own values, a chance to seek happiness after ways of its own, in an environment of its own. There are many happinesses, many goods, infinite variety. That is the basic state of mankind. I'm inclined to agree with this sentiment. A million different peoples with distinct cultures, all having their own worlds, living by their own rules, peaceful whenever possible, but more importantly, vibrant and distinct, living, not just existing. It's a far more appealing vision than the uniform mediocrity of clipping the highs and lows in the name of efficiency or of a greater good. But of course, it's not so simple. Harlan doesn't get to save humanity by just stepping out of the way. What's needed is revolution, not inaction, a conscious choice. Ending this eternity is not enough. We must reduce the probability of establishing any form of eternity to as near a zero as we can manage. So there is one thing we must do here in the primitive, a small change, a little thing. But here it gets a little dicey from a philosophical point of view, because that too is interference, and not without risk. We have viewed the sheaf of resulting realities. There is a probability, not a certainty of course, that Earth will end with a largely radioactive crust, but before that, you mean there can be compensation for that? A galactic empire, an actual intensification of the basic state. Yet you accuse the Eternals of interfering. We accuse them of interfering many times to keep mankind safely at home and in prison. We interfere once, to turn him prematurely to nucleonics so that he might never establish an eternity. And Harlan thinks how far short eternity falls. The petty machinations between senior computers, the infighting, they're holding the lower ranks harshly to account for every perceived infraction while bending eternity's laws themselves. It was as though he had always known eternity to be all this. Why else should he have been so willing to destroy it? Yet he had never admitted it to himself fully. He had never looked at it clearly in the face until suddenly now. And he saw eternity with great clarity as a sink of deepening psychoses, a writhing pit of abnormal motivation, a mass of desperate lives torn brutally out of context. It feels a little familiar. Anyone who's never felt that about their government or political party has never really thought deeper than slogans and tribalism. And with the decision made, the kettle they traveled back in ceases to be. Eternity ceases to be. And a long, bold future lies ahead, spanning hundreds of thousands of years and millions of worlds. Onward to empire. The good kind of galactic empire, not an evil one. Promise. Within Asimov's body of work, it's a curious companion to Foundation, paralleling psychohistory in some ways, but with the means to go back as well as project forward. But it's also a story about an individual changing the world. Best intentions and unintended consequences. The failure of systems and the power of conscious choice to make a better future. And maybe the need to break those damn time loops. Those things are so annoying. And also, shameless plug time. I finally finished writing Stellar Drift. By the time you see this, it will be available. Link in the description.